This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, the state to watch in the redistricting space is New York. So, first off, we've got an update on New York's congressional map. Can you speak on what happened?
Yeah, first of all, it's pretty wild that the state to watch for redistricting is New York,
Right.
right? Big state, reliably blue state, but you're exactly right. Just to table set a little bit, we had a very weird circumstance in that the New York Constitution requires something called the Independent Redistricting Commission to draft a map. It's a bipartisan commission, send it to the legislature. The legislature can make changes. It did that in 2021, and then a judge in a very sparsely populated rural county in New York, and yes, those exist, a very red county, struck it down and imposed their own map. So a lawsuit was filed. My law firm brought the case to say, look, the Independent Redistricting Commission needs to go back and do its job for going forward. That court-drawn map should be just been used for the one cycle. They should go back and do their job. We filed a lawsuit. We lost at the trial court level. We won at the intermediate court level because we're right on the law. And of course, the Republicans, meanwhile, are just trying to stall out the clock. The case is now before the High Court in New York, which is called the Court of Appeals, which is the most confusing thing ever.
Right.
That they call their Court of Appeals. The High Court is called the Court of Appeals, but it's there. It's set for argument later this year. And in the meantime, what the High Court said is, look, we're not going to order the Independent Redistricting Commission to do anything until we rule finally, because there'll be plenty of time for a new map. But, and this was the kicker, there's nothing that prevents the independent redistricting from getting a head start now and starting to do its work.
So, was this basically a nudge to them to do it? Or I guess more broadly, like if the decision that required the state's redistricting commission to redraw its maps is now paused, who will ultimately draw the maps?
So, I mean, it's a lot of tea leaf reading about why the
Right.
court put that in, right? Why didn't just say, nope, you don't have to do anything until after we rule, but instead it said you don't have to do anything, but you could. And whether that's a nudge, let's put it this way. From my standpoint, I'm happy they put that in, right? That's either a neutral or it's a good,
Right.
right? It's either nothing or it's a nudge. But the fact that the court sought to affirm the right of the Independent Redistricting Commission to continue to act is related to the merits of our case about whether or not they should act. So I think that's good. What will eventually happen, I think, is this. I think that eventually the plaintiffs in the New York case will be successful, which will mean that the High Court in New York will order the Independent Redistricting Commission to submit a new revised map to the New York State Legislature in time for 2024. And that'll be a win for voters. It'll be a win for democracy. And that's what I hope happens. And that's what I'm expecting.
And when can we expect this to happen? When can we expect a ruling to be handed down, since kind of everything is on pause until that ruling is handed down?
Yeah. So first of all, it's only on pause because the Republicans on the Independent Redistricting Commission aren't taking the nudge or won't take the nudge, right? There's no good reason why the commission wouldn't be doing its work now. And maybe they will. Maybe I'm selling the Republicans short there, but that seems to be the trend among Republicans, is to throw up roadblocks. They could be doing their work now so that this moves very, very quickly after the court rules, if they rule in our favor. In terms of when they will rule, I expect pretty clearly we will get a decision this year. We'll get a decision by the end of the year.
And do you think there's any impediment to having new maps in place by 2024?
No, absolutely not. There's plenty of time for new maps to be drawn and submitted and approved. New York doesn't have particularly early primaries. You may remember there's actually occasionally some griping about this fact that New York tends to have relatively late primary elections. So there's very little time pressure in New York right now.
Now, I know we've spoken about this in the past, but just for posterity here, how many congressional seats could be on the table for Democrats to net from redistricting in New York?
So the estimates range really from 4 to 6. I'm going to place down a marker and say it's 5. Not because it's in the middle, but it's sort of hard for me to see getting to 6 unless Trump really sort of collapses in New York. But it's frankly hard for me to see 4 unless President Biden were to underperform. So I think in a normalized world, you're talking 5 seats, but it could be 4, could be 6.
Okay. And by the way, that's essentially the entire margin in the House. I mean, and that's New York alone. And for anybody who's watched this series, we've talked about a number of other seats that could be going, that will most likely be going Democrats' way, thanks to violations of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That's in Alabama, it's in Louisiana, South Carolina, so Georgia,
Georgia.
Texas.
Yeah. And of course, there's the Florida case that I always skip over by accident.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like, because it's not a Section 2 case, but, we won, my law firm brought a case in Florida to restore an additional majority opportunity district in Jacksonville area that DeSantis had obliterated. And that case, we won at the trial court, that case is continuing.
Now, moving into a little bit of a different area in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul signed a package of 10 bills into law that expand voting rights in the state. But the RNC and other Republicans immediately filed a lawsuit challenging one of the laws, the Early Mail Voter Act. Can you speak on what happened here?
Well, at a macro level, Republicans want to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. And like, I can say this over and over again, when the mainstream media, and I'm not bashing the mainstream media like as some conspiracy theory, but when the mainstream media, slavishly reports that the Republicans are now embracing mail-in voting, show them this lawsuit. They're not embracing mail-in voting. They're embracing mail-in voting as a publicity tactic. But ask what their lawyers are doing. Their lawyers are in court in New York to try to stop New York, which historically has only had excuse absentee voting. In other words, there was no allowance to vote absentee unless you were out of the state or otherwise met a certain number of reasons. So Democrats, led by the governor, to her credit, found an innovative way around that restriction to create essentially mail-in voting for the 9 days of early voting, the 9-day early voting period. So it is expanding voting access. It's expanding vote by mail access. And the fact that the Republicans are bragging, issuing press releases that they're suing to block this, if you're a Republican listening to this, I don't know how many Republicans watch your channel, Brian, but I assume some. Your party is spending its money not to elect Republicans, not to battle its ideas in the public space, but to suppress voting rights in states around the country. And there's no better example than this lawsuit in New York. It's a real shame.
And is what's happened in New York with the early Mail Voter Act, is that on sound legal ground? Do they have any basis where they could actually succeed, where Republicans can actually succeed in this case?
No, of course it's on legal ground, sound legal ground. Look, if there's one thing that Jeffrey Clark and let's see if we can get this between you and I right. We got
John
Jeffrey
Eastman?
Clark, we got John Eastman, we got Cheeseborough, Cleta Mitchell, who
Sidney
else?
Powell?
Jenna Powell, yeah, right, exactly. Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, right? If there's one thing we've learned from Republican lawyers is they're never on solid legal ground. Rudy Giuliani, I can't believe we skipped the Rudy. But no, they're not on sound legal ground. This is not going to be a successful lawsuit. Thankfully, the people of New York are going to have this increased voting access. But again, the fact that this is where the RNC is spending its time and its money just tells you how desperate they are in going into 2024.
Mark, has there been any movement on changing local elections from odd years to even years to facilitate higher turnout?
Yeah, there has been. There's a law that was passed in New York to do exactly that, and I am a big supporter of it. I know there are some people who don't support it. I think the vast majority of the pro-democracy movement does support it. I think most Democrats support it, and it was passed by the legislature. I hope the governor signs it. There's no reason to have off-year elections. I think, frankly, Virginia should move their elections to even-numbered years. What you get from having an even-numbered years is you get higher turnout. That's it. Like what you get is higher turnout. So people who tell you that they want to keep odd numbered years because they want people to quote unquote focus on local issues. What they're really saying is they don't want more people participating in those elections.
Yeah.
And so every state should move towards all even numbered year elections. Yes, it would likely benefit Democrats probably everywhere. But even where it doesn't, like the fact is, it will increase voter participation, and in many places it'll also save taxpayer money because it will reduce the amount of elections have to be administered when there are not otherwise federal elections.
And that is one of those weird things in New York where you look at this big blue liberal bastion and you wonder why there are still things in place like odd year elections that do depress turnout. So, to that point, is there anything else in New York that you would like to see them do on the voting rights front that it hasn't done yet?
Absolutely. Look, New York voting is getting better, but that is a relative term. New York has and by the way, before the New Yorkers send all their bad comments, I'm a native New Yorker. I was born in Manhattan. I lived in New York growing up. And I'm proud of being from New York, but New York voting has been very, very regressive. Now, it's gotten much better. Kathy Hochul and the Democrats have made vast improvements to the voting process and the voting systems. But if you compare New York to many, many other states, it's still not up in the same place. So one easy place for it to start is, I'll tell you, my team's got a lawsuit against New York because they banned providing free food and water to people in line, and we're suing on behalf of the NAACP of Brooklyn, and there is no reason why New York is defending that law, and there's no reason New York has that law, and there's no reason why the legislature shouldn't have repealed that law. So that's like a small example, but there are lots of places. We could do a whole episode on how New York voting could be better.
Yeah, well, I think the top priority is making sure that the maps are finally fair in New York. So with that, obviously for anybody watching, to support Marc and his team, who he mentioned is representing the plaintiffs in this case in New York, make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's a news outlet he founded that focuses on everything voting and elections. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.